This is Microsoft Virtual Academy, and we are getting started with Template 10. We're talking about the controls that come in Template 10. We've talked about the page header. Now we're talking about what may be, I don't know, the most popular control in Template 10. People just love this thing. When the XAML team released the split view for the sake of implementing the hamburger control, they did it without any UI at all, which meant you as a developer gets to implement all of that UI. Well, shipping with Template 10 is a hamburger menu. It's deriving from Template 10, and from there, implementing all of the look and feel that you want to have a standard hamburger menu. We are using the News app that ships. This is the first-party app that ships with Windows 10 to model what that's going to look like. And from there, you can implement a hamburger menu from Template 10. That's what we're going to talk about right now.
Sounds like a plan.
Talk about a control with a lot of properties.
It is a complex control.
It is. It is. And I think that's worth pointing out because as you might want to make your own, you may have less capability than Template 10 has, and so it's worth making your own. Then again, you might appreciate all of the things that Template 10 does for you.
Certainly when you're halfway through trying to create your own.
Yeah, it looks so simple from the outside. Trust me, it looks so simple from the outside.
I know.
God.
Oh, I'll just put that together. How hard could it be?
What do you mean text goes from right to left sometimes? Things like that, right? What do you mean high contrast needs to be supported? All right, all that sort of thing is very important. And that and many others are part of the hamburger menu. Let's talk about its core capabilities around navigation. At its heart, the hamburger menu is really a wrapper for the frame. So inside the hamburger menu is just a frame. It navigates the way you would expect a frame to navigate. In fact, it works just fine with the navigation service of Template 10, of course, because we built it that way. In fact, the hamburger menu really doesn't work at all until you provide it a navigation service from Template 10. Yeah. And so from that navigation service, it extracts the frame, puts it into the right place, and all that other magical business. Pretty cool.
It is pretty cool.
So we have a couple of menus, or no, let's just call them buttons, a couple button locations inside the hamburger menu. The first one is the primary set of buttons. That would be the ones at the top, right? So here it's a home. And then we also have secondary, and that would be at the bottom of the menu. So in this case, it's settings. And from there, each of those is a vector collection, which means you can add anything that you want to. As long as it's a button type.
Anything.
I meant to say as many as you want to, and it'll automatically scroll and everything like that if it goes out of size as well. And so it's very, very nice. One capability, we're not even going to talk about this, but one capability is the secondary buttons. If you take away the text, can actually stack horizontally. Yeah, side by side. It's really nice. Okay, so only when it's expanded, obviously, because it wouldn't make sense when it's collapsed. So there are many built-in styles as well. If you don't do anything to it, it still looks terrific. And then you can set one of two things. You can set the accent color and start changing overall color. So if you set the accent color, let's say to orange, red-orange, then everything will be a variant of red-orange, and it'll use all of the hue changes that are prescribed in the internal design stuff for news. We're actually following that. Then you can also set individual properties as well. So if you wanted the background of the hamburger menu to be a certain color or to have some sort of image or something, you can set that as well. You can customize it in your own way, so you can have it so the menu button, the hamburger button, is visible all the time, is never visible. It's kind of up to you what you want it to do. You can also set whether or not it defaults to overlay or inline. Would it always collapse? That's up to you as well. There are 3 visual states inside the hamburger menu that control that, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. Let's look at the basic syntax for it. You can see that it's just a control called hamburger menu.
We say basic syntax, but there's obviously a lot there.
Yeah, that's right. If you could just hide all the extra stuff.
Yeah.
We're setting 2 things, right? The first one here is the primary button. And so you can have many primary buttons. What's a button? Well, it's a hamburger button info. So that's the type that you put in there. All kinds of things you'll put in the hamburger button info, including.
So the very interesting thing about this is that the hamburger button info is more of a model than an actual control per se.
Yeah, you're right.
It's a data model that is then being realized by a data template or a control template.
You're right. You're absolutely right. From just an insider's point of view, it might be interesting to know that this ultimately renders as a radio button that has a template of a toggle button. So it has the behavior of it. It looks like a toggle button, but behaves like a radio button. It's sophisticated.
But basically,
just be glad you don't have to do it.
Exactly. Well, what it's doing is enforcing the exclusivity of selection. That you obviously can only be navigating to one place, and you can only actually be at one place in your application at any point in time. And so it makes sense that you enforce that you can only have one item selected in your nav menu.
That's right. And if you have a desire to make the button, the content of the button, something special, that's totally available to you. You can see that the button itself is set up not as a data model, but actually as a UI. So here's the stack panel with the two items. The first is the symbol icon in the text box. You can see that over here. Here's the symbol. Here's the text box. That puts you in control. If you need it to be multiple lines, you can. If you need it to be extra tall, then you can set the height and go from there. So it's nice. In addition, there are a handful of properties on the hamburger button info, and we'll talk about those here in just a minute. This is just the basic implementation. And kind of down here, you can see in the secondary menu, one advanced one I know we won't talk about is the you can set the navigation transition info. So this means that as I navigate to a page, because I'm clicking on the button, we know that the hamburger button will handle that for us, but it will also apply this transition for us. Pretty cool, actually. And so if you want to take it all away, which is this syntax, you can just suppress transition. That's the way that works. All right, so let's talk about some of the core styling properties. The hamburger foreground and background, obviously, are the first. Background's probably more interesting than anything because you can control the buttons individually. But then we have this nav area, so that's the whole thing. It's the empty background. So the hamburger background foreground, or the button foreground and background, if you want to set them globally. And then the nav area background is that where there's not a button everywhere else. And then there is nav button background and nav button foreground for when you're highlighting an individual item. And then you have this line. In fact, let me go back one slide just to make sure so I can show. There's a subtle line that's right here, just separates where the secondary buttons begin. And so you have control over that as well. There's other properties, and more than these, including the thickness of the line. And you can just freaking do anything. It's amazing. Yeah, you can set it, including set the thickness to 0, right? You can do that also. So it's pretty cool. Some more things. Here's the actual implementation of how you might actually do this. This is a real implementation and how you can set these different colors. Pretty nice. And so you really have the flexibility to make this look however it is that you want it to look. So nice. One property that we haven't mentioned yet is the is full screen on hamburger menu. Is full screen basically, this is more like a method, to be honest. Yeah. It invokes an operation on the hamburger menu that extracts all of the content, takes the hamburger menu off of the visual tree, and puts your content on as the only thing on the visual tree. Now, why would you do that? There's a lot of reasons.
Good question.
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons you might want to do that. Natively, we do that when we're showing the extended splash screen. No reason for you to have an extended splash screen with a menu along the side. That doesn't make any sense. So we use is full screen to make sure it's full screen and that the user doesn't start monkeying around with your hamburger menu with tabs and things like that as well. Also, if you're writing an application, maybe it's a media application, you want to allow for full screen media viewing. This allows you to do that as well and get everything else out of the way. So pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, or kiosk mode.
Or kiosk mode, yeah. Well, if you're doing kiosk mode, you may not use the hamburger. I don't know. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I can see it. I can see it. Anyways, that's is full screen. It's a property. It's a powerful little property, and it solves a lot of interesting cases. The hamburger menu is just one of many controls inside the library. Another control that is friends with the hamburger menu, that is the page header. And so when you look at how the page header works with the hamburger menu, it's important to first say they don't know of each other. So there's no reference to the page header in the hamburger menu, and there's no reference to the hamburger menu in the page header. This is really all done with styles. And what happens is the narrow width and the narrow min width, it's a visual state property of the header. We synchronize that with the narrow min width of the hamburger menu. As soon as you do that, then as you start minimizing your application and making it more and more narrow, I guess making more narrow, not minimizing, making more and more narrow, then as the hamburger menu reacts to that and shows in the end only a hamburger button, then it allows your page header to move over and make room for that hamburger button so it's not occluded by the hamburger button.
Yeah, I mean, that's a key behavior. So the reality is you don't see this. All you see is your UI lays out appropriately. But behind the scenes, something's happening in that visual state transfer. You just don't see it.
That's right. So as you're setting the visual state properties, so there's 3. narrow, normal, and wide. As you set those 3 in your style, be sure and also let that roll into your page header as well, and then the page header will automatically set all those up. By the way, it might be interesting for you to know that out of the box, the hamburger menu is 48 pixels wide and 48 pixels tall. The hamburger button is 48 pixels tall. You'll find that as you start to use the page header, it has the same height, so it matches perfectly. And when it moves over 48 pixels to make room for that hamburger button. All these sizes are not arbitrary. They're pulled straight off of the News app, so they match perfectly. And it's obviously important so that as we move things around, they look right inside your application. So just a little aside.
Sure. So let's take a quick look at Visual Studio for a second. And what I have here is I'm showing the custom XAML with our styles. And so as we mentioned previously, here is our width values that we've set globally across our application. And here we have 2 styles. So here's where we actually assign our visual state narrow, normal, and wide min widths for our hamburger menu. And we can see the page header is also using the same values for narrow min width and normal min width.
Right. There is no wide for a page header. That's why you don't set it.
Absolutely. So that's set. Also mentioned inside our shell, and when you may recall when we talked about our navigation service and how we bring all these things together and how we have a frame and we have our nav menu and how it hosts the frames and so on and so forth. We have a shell that starts up and hosts our frame for us.
It becomes the root visual.
Yes. So this is our shell, and this is where we defined our hamburger menu. And so as Jerry's mentioned previously, here's our primary button. This is in fact showing our specific custom path for a button.
It's basically drawing an icon.
Yep. And our secondary. So let me quickly show you the news application. So what we have here is our fancy path being drawn as an icon.
Yeah, it's cool looking.
And we've got our hamburger. And if I open this up, we can see we're in a mode in which this is an overlay.
That's right.
If we continue to narrow things down...
it's an overlay, and in this case, the page header hasn't had to move.
Correct.
Because the entire page is rendered on to the right already.
Now, as we start to make this hit the minimal view, as soon as that compact view disappears, what we actually have going on now is this has been moved over 48 pixels to make room for this button, which is in isolation.
Yeah.
And so we didn't see this.
Because it's so quick.
Because it's so quick, but it's actually happened. As you can see, there's no flicker, anything like that. And then if we maximize it, we again return back to where this is in line. This is no longer being shifted over.
Yep.
The hamburger button has disappeared. As we've mentioned previously, we have the option to configure that so it doesn't disappear.
Right. Right. In fact, if you don't like the way it goes wide, by the way, this is one of the places where we actually stray from the way the News app works. It never goes inline. It's always compact. And so if you don't like that, all you have to do is set the wide min width value. You could set it extremely large, but that's not the easiest way. The easiest way is just set it as -1, and it'll never occur. And so then you never get that third step. Although I like it. Yeah, I like it. It's pretty common.
Okay, sounds good.
That is the hamburger menu, easily one of the most popular controls inside the library. Very easy to use, modeled after the News app that ships with Windows 10. Very customizable to a degree, right? Still is meant to look like the News app in the end. And so hopefully this is great for you, saves you a lot of time, has a lot of cool capabilities. Free for you to use.
Have fun with it.
Best of luck.